administration. And number one, we've got to make sure that we're holding the new private owner of Ottawa Towers accountable for what they agreed to do under that deal. So holding them accountable to actually live up to their side of the deal, number one. And number two, we've got to make sure that we're using the amphitheater on top of the Phoenix Center to make downtown Pontiac a destination again. And that is critically important. We used to have Arts, Beats, and Eats. We used to have the Fireworks Festival. We used to have the Taste Fest, the Mexican Festival, the Puerto Rican Festival. We've got to get back to making downtown Pontiac a destination. And that means giving Pontiac residents a reason to come downtown, but it also means giving people from throughout Southeast Michigan a reason to come to Pontiac, spend their money in our community, supporting our local businesses and our jobs. And the Phoenix Center Amphitheater can be a focal point and a centerpiece of those efforts.
Mayor and Deputy Mayor, of the remaining obligations and assets of the municipality, is the Phoenix Center the biggest albatross, or are there bigger albatrosses around our neck?
I missed the first part of that. In terms of buildings and capital improvements, or just broader issues writ large?
I'm just thinking those that would be perceived as assets but are, obligations, so you can look at it very broadly.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the Phoenix Center is in a class of its own when it comes to that category, which is, I know that there have been people who have spoken of it as an asset, and there are aspects to that structure that are assets if you look at some portion of the structure as a whole. But overall, I would say that the structure as a whole is clearly a liability.
What we can't do is continue to allow these spaces to sit dormant. We've got community centers that have been closed for 10, 20 years. And we just allow things to sit dormant like, nobody else does this. I'm sorry. Nobody else does this. And we can't continue to do it. So we've got to make a decision. If we think it's too much of a liability for the city to try to maintain, what are the other options? What do they look like? Because we need to talk about it. But what we can't do is just do nothing, pay our bills, and the residents of this city have no access to that building. We're constantly paying for things that we get absolutely nothing out of. And that's a real concern. So just my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Councilman Grimal, Mayor Grimal, and then Councilman Nicholson.
I completely agree with every single word you said.
Mayor Grimal, administration, do you want to share for the public and this body the implications to the financial health to our city if we were to not pay these obligations or not reconcile the budget offsets, if you will?
Well, yes, thank you. So a couple of things. One is, if we don't pay vendors who provided goods and services in good faith, we're likely to get sued by those vendors. So that obviously has its own financial ramifications.
And you can't spend federal monies without community participation. And that gives us a right as a community, regardless of whether it's CDC or not, to speak to the powers that be and what's happening with our lives. But they're using technicalities not to dispense information to us.
Right, makes sense.
Definitely makes sense.
Not really bringing money in. It's making it look like money's coming in, but it's not monies that's doing the locals any good whatsoever. As far as the decision that's being made, they're not being made in the residents' best interest.
Yeah, it's a really important point, I think, because there is a sense of, well, hey, whenever we've seen investment come into Pontiac, there's certainly a widespread sense, and it's mostly true, that, well, that's not really benefiting us. The jobs aren't going to Pontiac residents, and in theory, you could build the tax base and provide better services, but that hasn't materialized, at least not in recent years. So I think people are wondering, well, wait a second, the mayor is constantly running around and touting projects and investment, but it's not helping me. It's not benefiting my life. And I think mostly people are right about that. And so I know you've thought a lot about this, Jim and Monica, so I'm sure you can speak to this.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that was the sense of Opportunity Zone funding. It wasn't because the Opportunity Zones represented a situation that was dire. We all are aware of that. It was the fact that these funds would be used as community developed propositions, not real estate investments for somebody who wants to get capital gains reduction. And that's the basis of all Opportunity Zone funding, is capital gains reductions. But they must be put to work on behalf of the community. Otherwise, the community decides which and how those funds will be used. And there's the difference between what was just a kind of a boondoggle capital gains reserve for privileged people to something more dynamic in terms of the community. And this is, it was allowed to be real estate investment around the first year or year and a half. And then it became clear that that wasn't working, just as Bob's pointed out. So in December, they recalculated how those funds will be used. And I'm pretty sure that the weakened proposition that is represented by this real estate investment purely is not going to meet the credibility that's necessary to move those funds. But it really begins with the inclusion of the community as the development proposition. It's why we're looking at OLSA as a partner in this. They have a venture fund, and they want to do things with the venture fund, but they're, again, not community oriented in a lot of cases. They're real estate investments. But I think we should be thinking about that as a fashionable way of creating diversity in terms of approaches.
Right.
From a financial point of view, which I think is a real weakness for the mayor.
Totally agree.
And our community is that viable option. And I for the life of me, can't understand why that wouldn't put some real focus and light on elements that are more significant to a 21st century execution than a more traditional bureaucratic orchestration.
Yep. Well, I think you're 100% right about all of this. And, in terms of what we can do, I wonder, it seems to me that there's more we can do. I mean, certainly my email's out there and, I've sent it to some people and they've circulated it, but it seems like there's more we can do to make the community aware of just what a rotten arrangement this whole thing is.
Yes.
So we're sending out a newsletter, which is kind of our review, something to do on a yearly basis at the end of the year. And we kind of held it to get through some of this and see, what and how we might frame it in such a fashion. And we're going to include your letter in it if you don't mind.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
It'll go out to some 700 people.
We were talking, that's okay. We were talking about the income and targeting the people of Pontiac that they don't have enough income to spend. But we also in November lost a $4.5 billion investment in transportation and for our region. And so we need to start thinking regionally about assets and infrastructure. And transportation is infrastructure. The Phoenix Center is infrastructure. A parking deck is infrastructure. So to not talk about those big elephants in the room, we're sort of missing the point.
We talked about that they're being woven into an overall structure that starts to address.
Well, what I heard from Deanne is that we need programming and things that draw people. And if you think about what Pontiac people actually engaged with historically downtown, it was the Phoenix Center. They saw a concert there. They had their graduation ceremonies there. So it's really the only emotional engagement that they have to this downtown.
Is the mayor and city council, they just don't want to talk about it? Is it just like, we're not going to talk about it?
It's in litigation. It's been in litigation.
The owner of the buildings, they're called the Ottawa Towers, private ownership had easement rights to the parking and attachment to the parking. They are connected to the public structure. When condemnation happened, there was a lawsuit filed to try and thwart demolition so that their easement rights could be protected. And so my perception is that if there's an admission by the city that yes, you're right, we were wrong, or something like that, that it then triggers that damages are allowed and the taxpayers of the city of Pontiac could be on the hook for triple damages of whatever lost revenue could be, et cetera, et cetera. That was a great point that Monica made about the emotional connection. Yes. Pontiac Schools, we literally had our graduation ceremonies on there. So if you have very limited interactions with the downtown, it was Arts, Beats, and Eats, which left. It was a signature arts event downtown, or your high school graduation or something. If those were the few times that you intersected with downtown, both of those have been foreclosed from happening at the moment. So in your mind, you might think, because I don't know it, nothing's happening. So it's the perception. You made a really good point about that emotional connection.
We
Things
held.
that they connect with. They don't know that there's other things they can connect with in the meantime.
Yeah, and we held 2 open houses when it was going to be demolished, and we somehow were able to. We've not wanted to be with either party. We just wanted to be with the community, and we do a lot of community things, and that seems to be the only thing about this downtown that causes something that they could see themselves engaging in the future.
Please have a motion to come out of closed session.
So moved.
Support. It's been moved by Councilman Nicholson, seconded by Councilman Parker, that we move to come out of closed session at 10:19 p.m. Roll call, Madam Deputy Clerk.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrington,
Yes.
Goodman,
Yes.
James,